Imagine standing in a hospital hallway, the sharp sting of antiseptic in your nose, your heart pounding like a drum in your chest. You just got a call that your uncle, your rock, your family, is on life support, and you're begging your boss for a few hours off to say goodbye. And what does she say? It's just an uncle. Those words hit you like a punch to the gut, cold and cruel, stripping away your grief like it's nothing. You feel your fists clench, your throat tighten, but you're powerless. Now fast forward 5 years. Fate puts that same boss in front of you, her own uncle dying, and you get the chance to serve the kind of revenge that feels like it was written in the stars. Want to know how I turned her heartless words against her in a moment so perfect it gave me chills? Stick around, because this is a revenge story that'll have you cheering from start to finish. If you've ever been disrespected, kicked when you were down, or made to feel like your pain didn't matter, this story's for you. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss a single tale of justice served. Trust me, you're about to hear a story of betrayal, resilience, and a payback so sweet it'll leave you speechless. Let's dive in. My name's Sarah, at least, that's what we'll call me for this story. I was in my mid-20s, working as a healthcare aide at a small, family-owned nursing home in a quiet little town. The kind of place where the air was thick with the smell of lavender air freshener, but no matter how much they sprayed, you could still catch that faint, sterile bite of bleach. I loved my job even though it was grueling. 12-hour shifts, feet aching so bad you'd limp to your car at the end of the day. But the residents? They made it worth it. There was Mrs. Carter, who'd tell me stories about her days as a dancer, her eyes sparkling despite the wheelchair she'd been in for years. Mr. Thompson, who'd sneak me extra cookies from the dining hall like I was his grandkid. Their smiles, their gratitude, it filled me up in a way money never could. The nursing home was owned by a family, but the one running the show was Margaret, the owner's daughter. Picture a woman in her late 40s, always in a crisp blazer, her dark hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. Margaret had this way of looking at you, not at you, but through you, like you were just another piece of furniture. She wasn't outright cruel, not at first. But there was this edge to her, a sharpness that made your stomach twist. She'd snap if you took an extra minute on your break, roll her eyes if you asked for clarification on a task. The staff would whisper about her in the break room, trading stories about her latest outburst, but we all kept our heads down. Jobs like this weren't easy to come by in our town, and I needed the money. I'd been there for 2 years, pouring my heart into the work. Outside of the nursing home, my life revolved around my family, especially my Uncle Tom. He was the kind of uncle who made every family gathering feel like a party. Big guy, bigger laugh, the kind that echoed through the house. When I was a kid, he'd slip me $20 and wink, saying, "Don't tell your mom." He taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with my math homework when I was failing algebra, and when I got my first job, he took me out for ice cream to celebrate. He was my rock, the one I could call when life got heavy. So when my phone buzzed in the middle of a Tuesday shift, and I saw my aunt's number, my heart sank before I even answered. Her voice was shaking. Uncle Tom had gone in for a quadruple bypass surgery a few days ago. The doctors thought it went well, but an infection had set in, one they didn't catch until it was too late. He was on life support now, in a hospital 2 hours away, and they didn't know if he'd make it through the night. My aunt was sobbing, begging me to come say goodbye. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands trembled as I set down the tray of mashed potatoes I'd been holding for Mrs. Carter. Everything blurred, her face, the dining hall, the clatter of plates. All I could hear was my aunt's voice, and all I could feel was this hollow ache in my chest. I found Margaret in her office, her fingers flying across her keyboard, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows on her face. The room felt cold, like the air conditioning was cranked too high. I stood in the doorway, my voice barely steady as I explained, "Uncle Tom, the hospital, life support, my aunt's call." I asked for the rest of the day off, just a few hours to drive there, to see him one last time. Margaret didn't even look up. She let out this small, dismissive huff, like I'd asked for something ridiculous. "It's just an uncle," she said, her voice flat, her eyes still glued to her screen. I stood there, frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Just an uncle? Those words burned, like someone had poured acid on an open wound. This wasn't just anything. This was my family, my Uncle Tom, the man who'd been there for me my whole life. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. My throat was too tight, my eyes stinging. I waited for her to take it back, to show a flicker of empathy, but she just waved her hand. "We're short-staffed, Sarah. You know that. Get back to work." I don't know how I made it through the rest of that shift. My hands moved on autopilot, changing linens, checking vitals, helping residents to their rooms, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept hearing her words, over and over, like a broken record. "It's just an uncle." I kept picturing Uncle Tom in that hospital bed, tubes and machines keeping him alive, and me, stuck here, unable to say goodbye. Have you ever felt that kind of helplessness? Like the world is falling apart, and someone just shrugs it off like it's nothing? That night, I drove home in silence, tears streaming down my face. I didn't sleep. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, waiting for the phone to ring again. 2 days later, it did. Uncle Tom was gone. I never made it to the hospital. My aunt told me he passed peacefully, surrounded by family, but that didn't ease the guilt. I should have been there. I should have fought harder, told Margaret to shove it, walked out. But I didn't. I was too scared of losing my job, of not being able to pay my bills. And Margaret? She didn't even ask about it the next day. Not a word. It was like my grief, my loss, didn't even register on her radar. If I thought that was the worst of Margaret, I was wrong. Over the next few months, her true colors started to show. She'd always been strict, but now it felt like she was looking for reasons to make us miserable. She'd berate us for the smallest things, leaving a chart out of place, taking an extra minute to talk to a resident. One day, she yelled at my coworker Lisa for taking a personal call during her break. Lisa's face went red, and later she told me it was about her son, who'd broken his arm at school. Margaret didn't care. "Personal calls stay outside," she snapped, docking Lisa's pay for the day. Another time, she chewed out a new aide, Jake, for being 2 minutes late coming back from lunch. He'd been stuck in traffic, but Margaret didn't want to hear it. "If you can't manage your time, maybe you shouldn't be here," she said, loud enough for everyone in the break room to hear. Jake quit a week later. The rest of us started walking on eggshells, afraid to breathe too loudly around her. It wasn't just about control anymore, it was like she enjoyed making us feel small. Then came the day that broke me. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the nursing home felt almost peaceful. Margaret called me into her office, her voice clipped, like she was annoyed I even existed. She slid a stack of billing records across her desk and told me to tweak them. "Nothing major," she said, "just change a few dates, add some extra charges for a resident's family." My stomach twisted as I realized what she was asking. This wasn't just cutting corners. This was fraud, plain and simple. I looked at her, my hands shaking, and said, "I can't do that. It's not right." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might yell. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You're not a team player, Sarah," she said. "Maybe you're not cut out for this job." I stood my ground, my heart racing, but I knew I was on thin ice. A week later, I came into work and found my locker emptied out. Margaret was waiting by the front desk with a security guard. "We're letting you go," she said, her voice as flat as ever. No explanation, no warning. Just a pink slip and an escort to the door. I stood in the parking lot, my work bag slung over my shoulder, the autumn air biting at my skin. I felt like I'd been gutted. My job, my income, my sense of purpose, gone. And worse, I kept thinking about Uncle Tom, about how Margaret's words had stolen my chance to say goodbye. I wanted to scream, to march back in there and tell her exactly what I thought of her. But I didn't. I got in my car, drove home, and cried until I couldn't anymore. The next few months were a blur. I moved back in with my parents, picking up odd jobs to pay the bills. Waitressing, dog walking, anything to keep my head above water. I felt like a failure. I'd lost my uncle, my job, everything that mattered. But there was this tiny spark inside me, this stubborn little voice that refused to give up. I wasn't going to let Margaret win. Not forever. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to school. I enrolled in a nursing program, stayed up late studying, pushed myself harder than I ever had. It wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to quit, nights I felt like I'd never climb out of the hole Margaret had pushed me into. But every time I thought about giving up, I heard her voice in my head, "It's just an uncle." And I kept going. 3 years later, I got a job at the local hospital. It was like stepping into a new world. The hospital was busy, chaotic, but the people there cared. Nurses who'd check in on you after a rough shift, doctors who listened, patients who thanked you with tears in their eyes. I was an aide again, but this time I felt like I belonged. I was good at my job, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something again. Margaret started to fade into the back of my mind, a bad memory I didn't want to revisit. But life? Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. It was a quiet night shift, 5 years after I'd left the nursing home. The hospital hallways were dim, the only sounds the soft beeps of monitors and the occasional shuffle of a nurse's shoes. I was assigned to room 312, an elderly patient named Mr. Reynolds. He was in his final days, his breath slow and labored, his family gathered outside his room. I was checking his chart, my clipboard heavy in my hands, when I heard a voice that stopped me cold. Sharp, clipped, unmistakable. I looked up, and there she was, Margaret. She was standing just outside Mr. Reynolds' room, her face pale, her usual polished exterior fraying at the edges. She was talking to a nurse, her voice low but urgent. I caught fragments of the conversation. Mr. Reynolds was her uncle, and he wasn't going to make it through the night. My heart started pounding, a mix of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite name. The irony was almost too much. Here she was, standing in the same kind of hospital hallway where I'd stood all those years ago, begging for a chance to say goodbye to my uncle. And now it was her turn to feel that pain. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. She didn't notice me, she was too focused on her uncle, on the nurse, on the weight of the moment. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let it go. But then I remembered everything. The way she'd dismissed my grief, the way she'd fired me for refusing to break the law, the way she'd made me feel like I was nothing. And I knew I couldn't let this moment pass. I didn't have a plan, not really. It wasn't like I'd spent years plotting revenge, dreaming up the perfect way to get back at her. But in that moment, standing under the fluorescent lights, the path was clear. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and walked over to her. My steps were slow, deliberate, the linoleum cool under my sneakers. She was facing away, her shoulders hunched, her hands clasped tightly together. I stopped beside her, close enough to smell the faint trace of her expensive perfume. I placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm, and leaned in just enough for her to hear me. "It's just an uncle," I said, my voice low, each word sharp and deliberate. She froze. Her head snapped up, and for the first time, she looked at me, really looked at me. Her eyes widened, and I saw it all, the shock, the recognition, the sudden flood of memory. For a split second, I thought she might say something, but her lips just parted, no sound coming out. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I turned and walked back to my station, my heart racing but my steps steady. I picked up my clipboard, started charting Mr. Reynolds' vitals, and let the moment sink in. That was it. 4 words, 5 years in the making. I didn't need to yell or make a scene. Those words were enough. They carried the weight of my grief, my anger, my loss. And I knew, in that moment, that she felt it too. I could still feel her eyes on me as I walked away, could imagine the way her mind was racing, replaying that day in her office when she dismissed me like I was nothing. Let her sit with that. Let her feel what I felt. I didn't see her again that night. I finished my shift, checked on my patients, and went home as the sun was rising. But that moment in the hallway? It stayed with me. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about taking back my power, my dignity, everything she'd tried to strip away. I'd spent years carrying the pain of her words, the guilt of not being there for Uncle Tom. And in that hospital hallway, I handed it all back to her. I was free. Looking back, I don't think revenge is always the answer. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it backfires. But this was different. This was about justice, about showing Margaret that her actions had consequences. I didn't need her to apologize or beg for forgiveness. I didn't need her to fall apart. I just needed her to know that I remembered, that her cruelty hadn't been forgotten. And I needed to know that I could stand tall again, that I wasn't the powerless girl she'd fired all those years ago. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where you got to look someone in the eye and say, "You were wrong about me"? If this story hit you as hard as it hit me, smash that like button and drop a comment below. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen or experienced? Maybe it's a story like mine, where someone underestimated you and you proved them wrong. Maybe it's something small, something quiet, but just as powerful. Share it with us, we're all here for it. And if you want more stories of karma and justice served, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.